You are a very attractive man.
Coming from the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, that is indeed a compliment.
Come up to my private apartments. You may do whatever it is you think I want. But I will not share my throne with anyone.
No one else.
Tell me when the boys make cover, we'll move. Now!
Only cut back to Janet once the car's already moving.
Cut it tighter.
Oh, you imp, you've got nudity in there.
While her breasts were rather large, it was a challenge not to show them.
You'll have to cut those 6 or 7 frames where she blinks after she's supposed to be dead.
Alma, we've viewed the film 1,000 times. She does not blink.
The Hollywood Interview, Helen Mirren. Helen Mirren has carved out a unique niche for herself as the thinking man's pinup girl. A dynamic actress of incredible range and intelligence, Mirren was born Elena Lydia Mironov, July 26, 1945 in London, to a Russian-born father and an English mother. After cutting her teeth as a child in Britain's National Youth Theatre, Helen went on to train at the legendary Royal Shakespeare Company before landing her first film role in 1967's Herostratus, followed in quick succession by Sir Peter Hall's production of A Midsummer Night's Dream and Michael Powell's Age of Consent. Memorable turns followed in diverse fare such as Lindsay Anderson's Oh Lucky Man, followed by a great deal of TV and stage work. But Mirren really came into her own around the time she appeared in Tinto Brass and Bob Guccione's notorious epic Caligula in 1980. As Bob Hoskins' upper-crust gangsters maul in the British mob classic The Long Good Friday, and a memorably sensual Morgana Le Fay in John Boorman's masterful King Arthur adaptation Excalibur in 1981. We sat over lunch at photographer Jeff Dunas' studio to discuss her latest work and her remarkable career. I read that your father wound up in the UK under very unusual circumstances.
My father was born in Russia. He came to England when he was 2 years old. His family was upper military class. They were a form of aristocracy, I suppose.
It's my understanding that your grandfather was in London, brokering an arms deal for the Tsar with the British government when the Russian Revolution broke out back home. Is that right?
Yes, he was. And he was stuck there. He was very loyal to the Tsarist system and just happened to have brought his family with him on this trip because it was taking such a long time, which was very lucky. He left his sisters and mother behind, however. I just recently had their letters to him translated, which I've been carrying around for years, and it was an incredible experience for me to lift the curtain on their lives. In fact, I think we're doing a piece on the radio in England based on the letters.
So what did your grandfather and father wind up doing in England?
They both ultimately became taxi drivers.
So they had to become working class. What was that like for them?
I have no idea. I can't imagine what it must have been like, especially for my grandfather. It taught me one thing, though, and that is nothing is permanent. And no matter how established you think you are, nothing is permanent. And you have people who say, oh, well, my family goes back 500 years.
Well, whose doesn't?
Yes, exactly. Whose doesn't? And on that level, it seems most aristocratic people in America are black people because we know all their families go back 200 or 300 years.
Where do you think your artistic side came from?
I suspect it came much more from my English mother than my Russian father. My father was very intelligent and intellectual and was a classical musician before he became a taxi driver. My mother was working-class London from the East End. She had pretensions not to be working class, and she was very dramatic, my mother, so I suspect that's where much of my acting bug came from. Although two of the greatest actors Russia ever had my family name, which is Mironov. There was a man who died 5 or 6 years ago who was like the Olivier of Russia, whose last name was Mironov, so I think there must be a relation in there somewhere.
I know you started acting very young. When do you feel like you really knew you were an actor?
Well, you don't really know, do you? You kind of wish or hope for or dream. You never quite know. Certainly my parents were not of the you must follow your dream kind of attitude. They were much more of don't be stupid, you've got to be secure, which I love in retrospect. because I think all of that you must follow your dream nonsense, especially from those TV shows like American Idol, is just so dangerous because it's a cruel world. So you must do both. You must follow your dream and be practical and realistic. But yes, fairly young, I loved the process of imaginatively going into another world. And I did do the pragmatic thing and go to Teachers' College for 3 years in London, which was really a complete waste of time. Also, I didn't have any money to go to drama school. Plus, I didn't know how you became an actor then, so my options were limited.
You got your start at the Royal Shakespeare Company. What was RSC like?
It was a wonderful experience because it's an ensemble theatre, for lack of a better word. You're working with a huge group of actors, all of whom do very divergent roles and things in different plays. You're all rehearsing together. You're all getting drunk together. It was very communal and very educative on that level in terms of how to work with people, how to be a gypsy. And the grander your level of actor, the more gypsy you become.
Hold that! Just like that.
This isn't posing.
Don't tell me what's posing and what isn't. Just don't move.
How much will you pay me?
Money, money, money. That's all you ever think about. $50 an hour. Take it or leave it.
Okay.
Now lie down. Put this arm round there, like that. Knees up a bit. That's the ticket.
Your first film at 24 was Age of Consent, directed by the great Michael Powell.
That was an amazing experience. Very surreal. I'd hardly been on an aeroplane before doing that film, and here I was in the first-class compartment of a Qantas airliner on this long plane ride to Australia. And then we filmed on this tiny island called Dunk Island, near the Great Barrier Reef. And I was running around, hardly wearing anything, and working with the great James Mason, who was very kind. So it was a completely wonderful, very strange, very surreal experience. It all seems like a bit of a dream now. Michael was very kind to me, although he could be a bit of a martinet to others. I was very inexperienced, so he was very patient, as was James, who sort of guided me around.
Do you mind taking your clothes off?
Why?
Well, when you're swimming around, your dress interferes with the line of your body. I'm trying to paint you, not your dress.
Like a real model?
Yes.
Well...
$1.50 an hour?
Okay.
Another terrific film you did a few years later was Oh Lucky Man, with Malcolm McDowell and Lindsay Anderson.
Yes, that's a wonderful film, and very much locked into its era in terms of music and everything. But in terms of what it was saying about the world, it was very advanced, very ahead of its time. Lindsay had this extraordinary personality. Maybe I just attract these weird directors. They seem to be the only ones who like me.
Why do you say weird?
Well, you know, Peter Greenway and Lindsay, they're very distinct personalities. Visionaries, really. But Lindsay was very private, yet intensely loyal to his actors. Very serious, and yet always you felt he was laughing at himself and everything else. He always seemed to have this very dark internal laugh at the whole thing. He really put his inner being into his movies, I think. He really loved humanity in a very platonic way. He didn't strike me as being very sexual, and he would seem to have a sort of platonic love for men he worked with, but also, a number of women.
What happened with Caligula? You had this script by Gore Vidal, you had this dream cast, and it ended up being an epic porn movie. I know that Malcolm McDowell is ashamed of it to this day.
Yes, I guess it did end up being that. Malcolm shouldn't be ashamed of it. He's wonderful in it, and I'm certainly not ashamed of Caligula. In fact, I've always been rather proud of it. Within its form, there's a really great movie about Rome in there. The fact is, Gore took his name off it, but we made Gore's movie. We really did stick to the script, and he wrote a really full-on, out-there movie. It's funny. When we all met together for the first time and Bob Guccione gave us lunch and he stood up and said, "This is going to be the greatest film because we've got the best actors and the best director and the best writer," and kept going on and on and on. And the director, Tinto Brass, was sitting next to me as Bob was talking and whispered, "The best people to make the worst movie." Tinto and I became great friends, and we still are. He's very devil-may-care, and there's a wonderful excessiveness about him that appeals to me. Caligula may have been excessive, but it was never boring. I saw some of it again recently, plus it's two different movies. There's the version we shot, and there's a great deal of hardcore sex footage that Guccione put in later. It didn't need it, because what we had in there was quite enough.
You did one of the great gangster films around this time as well, The Long Good Friday.
It was one of those scripts that leapt off the page at you, where you went, "God, this is just fantastic." The one thing that was a problem was my character Victoria, who was a terrible character as written. I became a real thorn in the side of the director, John Mackenzie, in trying to flesh her out. But Bob Hoskins was incredibly supportive, which was great. So I was just trying constantly to pull this character into the story. I'm glad that I made such a fuss about it, because I think it enriched the film. You've got to have something you can hold your head up about later in life. But I was a bit of a pain for John, I think.
A car was blown up. Then a bomb was found at the Mayfair Casino. It hadn't detonated. One of our men was found dead in a swimming pool.
Yeah, he was stabbed.
I'm giving Charlie all the essential details.
I think that is an essential detail.
Auto, casino, stabbing, a bar blowing up. What is this, a gang war?
No question.
Then what?
Isn't it obvious, Charlie? This deal is very big. Someone is envious. Harold and I have no doubt that by tomorrow the problem will be settled.
You sound very confident.
I am.
Right after The Long Good Friday, you played Morgana Le Fay in John Boorman's great King Arthur film Excalibur, in an adaptation that I think is worthy of Shakespeare.
Yes, that was tricky on the page, actually. That one didn't leap off the page. It was quite difficult to follow, and I think it's very much to John Boorman's credit that he crafted this very magical world out of what could have been a real mess. Some of those scenes, when we read them during rehearsal, sounded absolutely embarrassing. We were all like, "My God, how can we say these lines?" But then, with all the other elements, it all started falling into place, especially with the lighting and the beauty of the film.
What is this place?
Here you enter the coils of the dragon. Here my power was born. Here all things are possible and all things meet their opposites.
The future?
And the past.
Desire.
And regret.
Knowledge.
And oblivion.
Love.
Oh, yes. Look.
I heard that Boorman cast you and Nicole Williamson, who played Merlin, because the two of you didn't get along, and it generated a very specific kind of tension on screen.
We had done a production of Macbeth prior to that, and our relationship was horrendous. Nicole is very brilliant, but a very dark and troubled man. He has so much talent in so many different directions, but he just couldn't bear me and was very nasty to me. I don't think I was nasty to him at all, but he just hated me. When I went to see John about the film, he said, "I'm thinking of casting Nicole as Merlin." And I said, "I don't think I could do it then, because we have this horrible relationship." John convinced me that he would help me make it work. And of course, being greedy and wanting the role, I said, "Fuck it, I'll put up with it." In fact, Nicole and I wound up becoming very good friends on it. We were finally free of the play, and I'm sure the play had a lot to do with it. So I finished up loving him.
Your eyes never leave me, Merlin.
Can't I acknowledge beauty?
Can't you acknowledge love? Perhaps you ache for what you've never known.
Perhaps you lust for what you cannot have.
cannot have. But you promised. All your secrets. You said you'd show me everything.
I've shown you too much already.
Hollywood is very glamorous and expensive. At the Hollywood Interview, we must buy many martinis and cigars in order to maintain our image on the Walk of Fame. If you enjoy the stars and artists you hear on the Hollywood Interview, please consider becoming a patron. You can become a patron by going to patreon.com/The Hollywood Interview. Patrons receive exclusive access to interview notes, bonus episodes, and soon-to-be-announced swag. Because swag is the real reason we all make movies.
The Hollywood Interview is proud to announce new bonus content. Coming soon is the Hollywood Interview Late Show. Host Alex Simon will sit down with fellow filmmakers, writers, directors, and actors to discuss films, filmmaking, and the impact that movies have on all of us. These conversations are a must for all cinephiles. In the first episode of The Late Show, Alex is joined by filmmaker Danny Wolf to discuss Tarantino, Scorsese, Jackie Brown, and An Irishman. What results is Hollywood Interview history and may cause our loyal audience to spit up their bourbon. We hope you enjoy. Hello, this is producer Connell. So we have a new feature on the Hollywood Interview. After this interview is over, hang out for a special segment where we look behind the scenes of movie making. Fiona Cooke of Extra Casting will share insights into the world of background casting in commercials and movies. It takes huge dedication and long work hours to provide all the actors on screen that you don't really notice. The background extras, or background artists if you prefer. It is a fascinating world that can be the first steps of future stars, or an entire career for the background professional. Thanks so much to Fiona for such great Hollywood info. We look forward to bringing you more behind-the-scenes glimpses into the magic of Hollywood.
Helen Mirren gradually became a household name on both sides of the pond as her appearances on screen became more prolific. She was heartbreaking as the policeman's widow who unwittingly had an affair with a young IRA recruit in Cal, appeared in Peter Hyam's underrated 2001 sequel 2010 as a Russian cosmonaut, was fine again drawing on her Russian ancestry as Mikhail Baryshnikov's former lover in White Nights, where she also met her husband, director Taylor Hackford, gave a multi-dimensional turn as Harrison Ford's saintly wife in Peter Weir's excellent The Mosquito Coast, and a no-holds-barred, uninhibited performance in Peter Greenaway's scathing, scatological The Cook, the Thief, His Wife, and Her Lover. 1991 brought about the birth of the character Mirren has become most identified with, Police Inspector Jane Tennyson in the Prime Suspect series. Along with her many accolades, Helen has been nominated for 2 Academy Awards, for The Madness of King George in 1995, and for Robert Altman's masterful ensemble drama Gosford Park in 2002, and won 3 BAFTA Awards for her work in Prime Suspect. She has twice won the Best Actress prize at Cannes for Cal and The Madness of King George, and has also captured 2 Emmys for Prime Suspect 4 and The Passion of Ayn Rand. Helen Mirren graces the big and small screen in 2 very different films. HBO's Elizabeth I is a gritty, literate look at the life of Britain's Queen Elizabeth I, a.k.a. the Virgin Queen, one of history's first liberated female leaders, who ruled England during the particularly bloody period of 1558 to 1603, also referred to as the Elizabethan period or the Golden Age, when English influence and power was marked worldwide. Co-starring the great Jeremy Irons, Hugh Dancy, and Toby Jones, Elizabeth I is a pinnacle in Helen Mirren's already illustrious career.
Oh, you son of a whore.
Your Majesty, you must know that...
Know what, my lord?
That I would never have taken a wife if there were but a chance you would smile upon my suit.
I never wish to see your face again.
My heart still runs on you, I swear it.
Be off before I hang you. I'm minded to hang you now, with my own hands.
Bess!
Get out of my sight!
You have 2 very different movies coming out, Elizabeth and Shadowboxer.
I also did a film about the other Queen Elizabeth, Elizabeth II, which will be coming out later in the year. It's a Stephen Frears film.
I saw that the director of Elizabeth I, Tom Hooper, Also directed the last episode of Prime Suspect. You must have worked well together.
Yes, we enjoy working together very much. I suggested him for this project because he is this wonderful combination of young and hungry, but also quite experienced. He's done a lot of big TV stuff, which in a way is more demanding than doing a movie because the turnover is so much faster. To do something like Elizabeth, you've got to have someone who has the strength to hold on and sort of get through it.
You know, the thing I really liked about it was it reminded me of the stuff people like Tony Richardson and Franco Zeffirelli did during the 1960s. There's definitely a classical element to it, but also a real kitchen sink feeling that brought grit and realism to the table.
We had the best Steadicam operator in the world working with us, which was amazing. Almost the whole thing was shot on Steadicam, which is technically difficult, but it gave the film an immediacy which it needed. So often you feel as if you're outside watching this pageant take place, which is gorgeous, but it doesn't put you into it. We wanted to drag the audience into it.
Yeah, it had a real griminess to it. Nobody looked like they were a model. You could believe that they bathed maybe once or twice a month and that their teeth were really bad.
That's probably because it was shot in Lithuania. We shot it all there.
What were your impressions of the country?
It's extraordinary, very beautiful and rather magical. At the same time, it was a little frightening, which many of those northern European countries are. A lot of dark things have happened there over the centuries, and you can't get away from that fact. The extras all had these very real, almost medieval-looking faces. Lithuania is probably very close to what the English countryside looked like in those days. You know, heavily wooded and underdeveloped. It's very forested in Lithuania, very underdeveloped. So they used a certain amount of digital effects to put bits of London in there, but they also built these amazing sets out of wood that were very authentic.
And what were your impressions of Elizabeth herself?
She was fascinating, an amazing character. The only sadness about playing someone like that is that you only have access to them through doing a huge amount of research, the type that which will allow you to get only so close to who they were. The accounts of her that were written at the time were, of course, very tempered because the writers were frightened they would displease her and they'd get their heads chopped off. So the only truthful accounts you have of her are from foreign ambassadors who didn't have the necessity to be polite. All of them were absolutely fascinated by her. She was this incredibly powerful, often foolish, but deliberately or just by instinct, an absolutely superb politician. I mean, obviously she was very bright, spoke several languages fluently, but obviously a fool in love as well. But that's what's so great about her. She wasn't just this cold fish. She was incredibly emotional and passionate. And since she was the queen, her emotions were allowed to rage. She's so unlike Elizabeth II, whose emotions were completely controlled and pulled in. There are so many similarities between Elizabeth I and II, but also they are polar opposites in just as many areas.
Well, one reason Elizabeth I was so hugely emotional was the fact that she never consummated any of her relationships. Why do you think that was?
It was incredibly dangerous for her physically. Pregnancy was a dangerous thing for women in those days. So many women died in childbirth, it was very, very common. Politically, it was dangerous as well. To get pregnant by someone, and it was impossible to hide since she was constantly surrounded by people all the time. They lived a very public life in those days. People slept in their rooms with them, so you couldn't get away with anything. Plus, there were so many people whose interests would have been served had she been disgraced. She came to the throne as a bastard. Henry VIII never took away her status as a bastard after declaring her to such, even though he put her second in line to the throne after a sister. So her claim to the throne was always very precarious. So that was another fear of getting married.
Henry VIII was a Protestant also, right?
Yes. Henry created the Church of England after he wanted to get divorced and threw out Roman Catholicism.
You know who I kept thinking of while I was watching you in Elizabeth? Hillary Clinton. As the English weren't ready for Elizabeth, I don't think the U.S. is ready for Hillary.
She's an extraordinary woman, and I agree with you. But it's coming. It's very interesting that people are even talking about it, because 10 years ago, they wouldn't have even talked about it. At least now, the thought is out there in the ether.
I don't know. I think 10 years ago, we would have been ready for a woman or a minority, but since the current administration took office, I really feel like this country has devolved 3 or 4 decades. I think we've gone back to the 1950s.
And I think in a far more dangerous way than in the 1950s, because the US is the most powerful country in the world now, and that threat from the East is gone. And also because you have corporate globalization, development that's gone so far beyond anything that existed in the 50s. There's such an unbelievable economic power out there. It's almost a return to feudalism in a way. The peasants are sort of kept quiet with celebrity gossip magazines and Big Brother.
Yeah, and in this case, Big Brother is in the form of the leaders of our government who invoke the name of Jesus Christ to shut the peasants up.
Right, fundamentalist religion.
Well, which is what they did back in the day as well, if you look at the history of both the Protestant and Catholic churches, when their officials literally ran the world. Their doctrines were designed to keep the masses opiated.
Yes, absolutely.
Do you think Elizabeth would have been more comfortable as a modern woman in this century?
No, she would have hated it. I think if you took Elizabeth out of her environment and plopped her into this one, it wouldn't have worked, because she was a dictator, really. She was a Saddam Hussein, or at least she had the power of one. She could put anyone into prison, torture them, have them executed.
Well, although in terms of manners and mores of the time, she didn't really strike me as being a demagogue.
No, that's true. She wasn't out of control, relatively speaking, and whenever she could, she tended towards leniency and towards forgiveness.
The entire film, parts 1 and 2, deals with her relationships with these two men, played by Jeremy Irons and Hugh Dancy. Had you worked with Jeremy Irons previously?
No, never. I've known him for many years, but never had the great pleasure of working with him, and he was so wonderful to work with. He was born to play that role.
You know, the older he gets, the more he reminds me of Laurence Olivier. He has the same sort of carriage that Olivier had.
That's interesting. He's a superb film actor, isn't he? He's also a brilliant stage actor and a great comedian, which many people don't realise.
What about Hugh Dancy?
How lucky can a woman get? Hugh and I started at the beginning of the piece, doing all our scenes together. And every scene we did, I had to kiss him, or he, poor kid, had to kiss me. And all the girls on the set were just looking at me with envy, saying, "I can't believe how lucky you are."
Tell us about Shadowboxer. Have you seen it yet?
No, I haven't. I tend to avoid seeing films that I'm in. Lee Daniels, who directed it, is a great guy. He calls it a homo euro ghetto, which I think is a sort of great mixture of things. And that's probably exactly what it is. It was great fun to do. You don't often get to do pieces like that, so I was glad to do it. Most girls don't get to run around with guns and be assassins.
Man and killer, huh?
I used to be with Mikey's father. He died when Mikey was 7.
How did you end up?
End up like this, what I am? I found something I was willing to kill for.
Let's talk about Prime Suspect and the character of DCI Jane Tennyson.
Jane is a great character. I'm doing just one more, which we're going to start shooting in this year. That was a gift of a role. That just landed in my lap. Of course, at the time you don't know that. I thought it was a lovely script, but you never start out realising how much it's going to affect your whole life at the time. But I had the great luxury with Prime Suspect of only doing one about every 18 months. So I was never trapped into doing a TV series full-time and could always go off and do, other things, movies, theatre, etc.
In addition to being a great character study, the series has also been a real metaphor for how English society is changing.
Yes, and as it's progressed, I've been able to be more involved in the actual storylines with the writers and so forth. I always love it best when the stories were contemporary as possible and relevant to the world that we live in, rather than a generic murder mystery.
Mr. Soddy, I'm afraid a body has been found on the heath. It fits Sally's description. Sally was pregnant when she died.
It seems from the very beginning that you've always been very uninhibited and have never had a problem doing nudity on film.
Oh, that's not true. I've always had a problem doing nudity. I hated it. I hated the fact that I hated it, however. It's never a comfortable thing. It was quite nice in Australia because one was out in nature and Michael Powell was very sweet, but I never enjoyed it, ever. It's always mortifying. But I always felt it was something I should get over with as well. I might seem uninhibited, but believe me, I'm not. I've just never thought it was necessary, ever. My taste in movies tend towards the European, and I think when sex and nudity are dealt with in an adult or poetic way, it's wonderful. It's great. It's a great extra tool in all those dramatic tools we have. But I didn't want to be uptight, and I also told myself, it's okay, because you work in the theatre. You're not going to get stuck with it. But of course, I have gotten stuck with it, in a way.
You have to tell us about working with Brother Bob Altman in Gosford Park.
Oh my God, genius. Oh God, genius. Most directors basically do it the same way. They're great, and many are great visionaries, but they basically set up the scene in the same way and shoot the same way. Robert Altman is completely different. You never know if you're on screen or not, which is great. So you've all got to be on it all the time. There's no such thing as having your moment with Altman. You look at your role, see that you have this big speech, show up on set, and realise the whole scene is about the dog running around the people in the scene, all of whom are having their big speech. He's the only guy who will start with what's happening in the background, and then the main actors find their place within that. That's why his screen is always so full of detail, because those details haven't been put in the last minute by the first AD.
Oh, her ladyship.
Oh, so sorry to disturb you. Please do sit down and finish your supper. Mrs. Wilson, a major crisis has arisen. I have just found out that Mr. Weissman won't eat meat, and I don't know what to do. I can't tell Mrs. Croft. I simply don't dare. Oh, everything's under control, Your Ladyship. Mr. Weissman's valet informed us as soon as he arrived, so we've prepared a special version of the soup. He can eat the fish and the hors d'oeuvres. And we'll have a Welsh rabbit for the game. Of course, I don't know what we're going to do about the entree, but we'll think of something. Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. 10 steps ahead as usual.
He will very carefully set up, rehearse, and have all those elements in place before he shoots. But in a way, the background actors are more important than you are. Then he'll have 2 cameras, one on tracks over here and another one on tracks opposite, constantly moving around the scene. I've never seen another director who does that. It's great. He's one of the great visionary American directors, without a doubt.
Any final thoughts?
Well, it's been very interesting, you taking me through my whole career like this, and it's gotten me thinking. I was very conscious during Elizabeth that this will probably be the best role I will ever have in my life. I was thinking, it absolutely doesn't get any better than this, Helen. You might as well just go for it and give it your all. And I think I did. Women's roles don't come along that often anyway, so to play one like this, I will never forget how lucky I am.
I don't think I shall ever understand what happened this summer.
Well, the circumstances were exceptional, ma'am. And in the end, you showed great personal strength, courage, and humility.
You're confusing humility with humiliation.
That's not true.
You didn't read the cards on the flowers outside the palace that Friday.
I actually think history will show it was a good week for you.
And an even better one for you, Mr. Blair.
But there are 52 weeks in the year, ma'am, and 2,500 in the time since you've been Queen. And when people come to assess your legacy, they won't remember those few days.
Oh, really? You don't think that what affection people once had for this institution has been diminished?
No, not at all. You're more respected now than ever.
I gather some of your closest advisors were less fulsome in their support.
One or two. But as a leader, I could never have added my voice to that chorus.
Because you saw those headlines and you thought one day that might happen to me.
Oh.
And it will, Mr. Blair. Quite suddenly and without warning. So, shall we get on with the business in hand?
Like most of the male population, Helen Mirren had given me palpitations of the heart and brain since childhood. My own introduction to her unique brand of elegant, cerebral sexiness occurring with John Boorman's Excalibur in 1981. The petite woman with the easy smile who greeted me wasn't the bigger-than-life figure I expected. She wore a T-shirt promoting relief for victims of Hurricane Katrina, which had recently happened, and a pair of well-worn jeans. She had the figure of a 25-year-old, but didn't seem to care. Another of my favorite conversations ensued. The lady herself, like the lady on screen, didn't disappoint.
Dame Helen Mirren was voiced by Fiona Cooke. Fiona is British, and although not all British sound like Dame Helen Mirren, Fiona happens to. Fiona would like us to know about Extra Extra Casting, which is at extraextracasting.com, all one word, and also can be found on LinkedIn. Alex Simon was played by Alex Simon.
And that's all I have to say about that.
And now a Hollywood Interview special feature. Behind De Niro, Streep, de Havilland, and Bogart, there are actors moving around. They cross streets with shopping bags, eat dinner out of focus, or play roulette way over there as Rick's old flame walks into his Moroccan cafe. Join us as we look at casting for the background extra.
My advice would be you have to have a really great memory for faces. You have to have great interpersonal skills, and you have to have a lot of patience because people do change their minds, and you can't yell at people much as you want to. And you have to be able to put in extremely long hours. We are one of the top commercial casting companies for background, in Los Angeles, and we do, many of the commercials that you see on the Super Bowl commercials. A huge portion of those are done by us, I have to say. We only do registrations twice a year, and then you get a feel of the person, because one of our extras might be on set with Helen Mirren next week or something. So we need people that we know, and a lot of our extras we've had for a good while, and they're very good friends, and people have got married, who met on our sets, and they're all friends, after work. So it's a whole community, and we help people get, health insurance, provide them with a regular income. And it's really for me, I've been doing it for 20 years now or so, and it's very good. It's stressful, but it's rewarding. People have to show up sometimes at 4:30 a.m. Really, like a film. They have to show up early, be professional. Sometimes drive to kind of far location. So you've got to make sure you get good people, and then you get the wonderful people like George Clooney, Matt Damon, who they just say kind of eats with the crew, is adorable, just fantastic. So it's interesting. Sometimes the more established stars are the ones that are much more kind of chill. Big changes are definitely the rise of non-union. And people are, wanting to shoot a lot more abroad, so they can pay the extras very little money. My favourite movie of all time is Sunset Boulevard. That's my favourite. The script of that movie is sublime. One of my favourite lines in movies is when the William Holden character says, "I went to see some yes men at Metro. To me, they said no," which I think is just fantastic. You can contact us at extraextracasting.com.
This has been a production of No One Else Media and Wanderer Productions.